One of the funnest games of the year, Monday Night Football. Denver Broncos defeat Jameis Winston's Cleveland Browns. Some unbelievable Jameis stats from that football game. Suspensions. We've got news about the Bears head coach search and a whole lot more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love all of our everydayers out there and seeing a lot of new listeners jumping on with this daily here at Peacock and Williamson. Make sure you subscribe. It helps us tremendously. Appreciate it. Some everydayers not even subscribed up. Just hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast, video or audio. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. Get a big return right now on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win that first $5 bet, just visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we got to get started with Monday Night Football and heck of a shootout. A lot of fun. Browns at Broncos. 41-32 the final as Bo Nix's Denver Broncos defeat Jameis Winston's Cleveland Browns. And we could talk about a number of things from this game and the Jerry Jeudy revenge game. But I think we got to start statistically with Jameis Winston and maybe the most Jameis Winston game that's ever been Jameis Winston, right? And 497 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. All he needed, Matt, was to complete that last pass to go over 500 yards and have 5 touchdowns if he didn't throw it to the other team.
Yeah.
LASIK surgery Winston got a couple years ago still has not allowed him to see defenders. I don't know if he cares where defenders are. I think he just wants to sling it. And it made that game a whole lot of fun to watch.
A whole lot of fun, from an outsider perspective. I mean, the Browns coaching staff's probably losing their mind, and Browns fans, et cetera. And I thought that last pick might even be the third pick six. We didn't even mention he threw 2 pick sixes too. I mean, like it's a little cherry on top. Give the team 14 points. Maybe
I got some more numbers and notes on that as well. Yeah,
I bet there's plenty. I mean, everyone. His numbers compared to everybody else's are crazy in some of these, good and bad. Fun, yes. It's almost like that's the Winston experience, no matter who they play. Last week, was Steelers on Thursday night, and it started that way, and then it was a massive snowstorm. Now we get the Steelers this upcoming week. Denver notes. Bo Nix is a good football player. I mean, it's not like, oh, he's kind of a good story. He's moving around. I mean, I think he's progressing into a quality NFL starter already. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because, year 2 could be a lot uglier. And, Stroud is taking a step backwards. And, not all these guys are out of the woods. But really, and I know we're going to talk some Caleb Williams as well. I like what Denver does. And I really like the emergence of Sutton. I think that their wide receivers as a whole are better than we thought. They look like they were a garbage unit. It's a really good offensive line in general. I like their pass rush. I love Surtain. But for someone that lived through the Levi Wallace experience for a couple years here in Pittsburgh, not having a second corner was really crippling to that Denver defense. Just throw at anyone, not Surtain. He can only do so much. It was a little crazy.
It's amazing. So Jerry Jeudy, congrats to Jerry Jeudy, and he had a nice.
Yeah, he was really good.
He was having fun with the fans were booing the heck out of him. But he was kind of playing the villain with a little bit of a smile on his face. That was fun to see for Jerry Jeudy. He's been a fine player, but not the guy that a lot of people, including me, thought he was going to be coming out of Alabama in the draft.
100%.
And I think I know why. I want to get to that in a second. But to your point, he was matched up against Patrick Surtain in coverage a little over half of his snaps during that game. He ended up with 235 receiving yards, 9 catches for 235 in the touchdown. He had 20 yards on Surtain. So that means less than half of his snaps, He got the other 215 receiving yards against Levi Wallace and the rest of the secondary of the Denver Broncos. So that pretty much tells you the story right there with what ailed the Denver Broncos in that game on defense.
Yeah, and I was taking notes from a Browns perspective. Again, the Steelers are playing them again this week, so anything I could gather. But Jeudy, even Tillman and Elijah Moore, and certainly Njoku are all putting up numbers consistently with Winston. Like I made this huge mistake with the Browns last Thursday, thinking that they were a really bad team. And I've probably said this on here before. The 2024 Browns are a really bad team. But the Winston-led Browns, I think, are an average team. The Watson-led team is the worst offense on the planet. So if you look at season-long stats, they're terrible. But that's not who this team is right now. And Judy's the glaring example, but all four of those receivers, including Njoku, have all ate well. Elijah Moore, 8 for 111, 2 touchdowns for Njoku. Tillman was out, of course. But then I saw last night on a graphic, only the Broncos, coincidentally, have gone longer not having a 100-yard rusher, and it's not Nick Chubb anymore. He looks like he's not he's pretty a shell of himself. I mean, Jerome Ford's your leading rusher at 41 yards. It's pretty clear what they do on offense. They live and die by Winston, which is fun, but is incredibly volatile.
And Chubb's either done or needs more, time because they're not giving him the workload that you would think that Nick Chubb would get if he was healthy and 100%. And thus is the life of an NFL running back, and we've seen that numerous times this week, let alone every single year and every single week of an NFL season. Note on Jeudy for me, there's two big things that stand out for me, and you wanted to go back to the draft and talk about getting players right, getting players wrong. Motivation is huge for an NFL player.
No doubt.
And we saw an absolutely motivated Jerry Jeudy. And I think Jerry Jeudy isn't the most self-motivated guy. And if you're trying to scout players, it's a lot more than height, weight, speed. You want to find someone who's wired in a way that they are self-motivated, and they're going to play like that. They're going to play like a revenge game, a chip on their shoulder every single game. And I don't know if we've seen that from Jerry Jeudy throughout his career. And I think he was a little bit miscast in Matt Harmon, reception perception, kind of pointing this out after the game. I think the best thing for Jerry Jeudy is that the Browns also had Elijah Moore. So they didn't try to treat Jerry Jeudy in this offense as the jitterbug, quick route runner over the middle of the field, because he doesn't really work that well in the trees. He's not really good with holding onto the ball with contact and working in the trees. He needs to be free. He needs to gallop around a secondary, and he can make huge plays on the outside. And we're seeing him allowed to do that in this offense with Jameis Winston, which points to your fantasy football stuff, making him so much more viable now as a fantasy football player and making him more viable as a real football player. So I think there's a couple of things with Jeudy, and I think motivation, how he plays, is a big one, and it's one of the hardest things to do in the NFL draft is really get into someone's brain and know how hard they're going to work, what they're going to do when people aren't looking. Not to say he's been a bad teammate or doesn't work or whatever, but motivation is so huge, and you see what Jerry Jeudy can do when he's used a little bit better and has some better quarterback play. Even if it's doesn't lead to wins, it leads to more production for sure. And is really motivated and wants to go out there and play hard and do everything he can to win a football game. So that it's very fascinating to me. Not only the Jameis experience, but the Jerry Jeudy angle is really fascinating to me, because he was a guy that I thought was the best wide receiver in that draft, because I thought he could do things that we saw on Monday night, and we just haven't seen a lot of that in his NFL career.
Yeah, I'm going to expand on that a little bit. I think Matt Harmon does absolutely tremendous work. And I'm actually in the middle of listening to his podcast right now. The one that his Reception Perception podcast is very good. And I urge everyone to subscribe if you're into wide receiver nerdiness. And he does a great job of this, but I don't think the general group of analysts, probably us included, realize there are different wide receiver positions. Sometimes these teams just draft a wide receiver and say, we'll just line them up at any wide receiver spot. That's like drafting a center and asking them to play left tackle. they're very different roles and where they align and the routes they run and the concepts and all those things. A wide receiver isn't a wide receiver, a wide receiver, a wide receiver. And the other thing I'd expand on with Jeudy is I think there was a misnomer, and I was a little guilty of this as well, is the prospect. There were so many great videos and combine, and boy, he has really quick electric feet. And he does, and he did. But that doesn't mean he was a great route runner. He had the feet to be a great route runner. And to your point, I don't know that he did all the dirty work behind the scenes to develop into a great NFL route runner, you know?
Yeah. And it looks really nice when you're doing 7-on-7, when you're doing ladder drills, when you're in college and you have a better football team than the other guys and you have all this open space, when things get condensed and you have to win dirty. Jerry Jeudy hasn't been great at that. And so it's better to get him out in space and allow him to do those things and gallop out there. And so
not super physical either. I mean, he's not Cortland Sutton, you know?
Yeah. Which is why he's not good through contact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why you need to get him off the line, but still have him outside. So that's why he fits with that sort of the Z thing rather than the Z receiver, 100%. Not sort of an X receiver where you're going to get up on when you're on the line and get pressed a lot, and not really a slot guy because he's not that great working over the middle of the field in that regard either. So
if you lined him up on the line of scrimmage and put Pat Surtain across from him for every snap of every game, he wouldn't catch a lot of passes. But if you use him like that, he's going to tear you up.
He still did all right, and he showed that he was able to get vertical, break off a little comeback, make a catch on the sideline. He can do some of that still, even against Patrick Surtain. But
and I'm old enough to remember third-year breakouts for wide receivers. I mean, just because some guys don't light the world on fire in year 1, 2, 3, maybe it takes them a little longer, you know?
Yeah, it used to be you never did anything as a rookie wide receiver, and then year 2 was like, okay, let's start to see it, and then year 3, okay, now it's the wide receiver breakout, and guys are coming into the league a little bit more ready to play than they used to be. Last note here, we got to move on from this game. Jameis Winston this is from OptaStats. Jameis Winston threw for 497 passing yards. And the Broncos also had 171 interception return yards against him. The combined 668 passing yards plus interception yards for Jameis Winston was the most by any quarterback in a single game in NFL history.
Wow. Pass yards plus interception yards.
Return yards, yeah.
Wow. That's insane. Do you think he's their starting quarterback next year?
No.
It's too volatile. Huh?
Maybe week 1 in a
draft
role.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think they love him, and they don't have a ton of options other than the draft either.
We know who Jameis Winston is. Nobody is going to have Jameis Winston as their plan. He might be a bridge plan. He might be an extra guy. But and look, he's great for your fantasy receivers. But the win-loss column, I think we know who Jameis Winston is, and this is the roller coaster ride. It's so fun.
I'm excited for your son to be my age's son. I mean, not that he's not a great age as he is, but my 18-year-old's like, Dad, do you remember when Winston came out and was like, I got eye surgery. I didn't realize I can't see anything. You know, like, how could you not? You know, like, he was blown away. Like, how could he go that long without getting LASIK or whatever and having terrible vision? Like,
we got to move on. But speaking of the draft process, imagine drafting a quarterback. It's like, oh, he can't see. Whoops. Number 1 overall.
Yeah. He's got 2,200 vision or whatever. Like, yeah.
Al-Shaair suspended 3 games for his hit on Trevor Lawrence, and the Bears have a plan for their head coach search. Ryan Poles, GM safe, will lead that search. More on that next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money action on sports. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made fantasy for sports accessible to all. So all you do, this is how simple it is at Prize Picks and how fun it is at Prize Picks. All you do is you pick more or less on at least 2 players' projected statistics for a game, and it gives you a shot to win up to 100 times your cash, depending on how many of those you hit on and get correct on the more or less. And you're not playing against any sharks. You're not playing against the 10 million members. You are playing against the stat projections at Prize Picks. And all you do is pick more or less. For example, 1.5 passing TDs for Lamar Jackson, more or less than on that stat projection. And have some fun with your buddies, hot takes with your friends, and win real money this football season in with you and your crew running your game on Prize Picks. All you got to do is download the app, use code LOCKEDONNFL, get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup at Prize Picks. Run your game. So Azeez Al-Shaair has been suspended, Texans linebacker, after his malicious hit, his late hit on a sliding Trevor Lawrence. And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because of the big suspension. And NFL Vice President of Football Ops, John Runyon, former offensive lineman in the NFL. This was the...
It wasn't the cleanest player, by the way.
I want to get to that. And how much time changed, but the statement reads:
did he take over for Lyle Alzado or Jack Tatum, or
Director of Player Safety Lyle Alzado?
Yeah, Satan was before him. Come on.
From John Runyon, statement, quote, "Your lack of sportsmanship and respect for the game of football and those who play, coach, and enjoy watching it is troubling and does not reflect the core values of the NFL." So Al-Shaair is, he's going to, fight this 3-game suspension. But as of now, Al-Shaair has been suspended 3 games. And there's a really funny clip floating around the internet right now of John Runyon, the player, after a play. Really? And there's a pile on the field. And if you want to go check it out, I retweeted it. It's really funny. And at BD Peacock, by the way, on Twitter. And John Runyon, after the play plays over, and it's Eagles 49ers. He was Eagles offensive lineman at the time. And there's a 49ers linebacker standing next to the pile. The play's over. John Runyon comes running, does a Superman dive over the entire pile, head first into the head of another player that's just standing around the pile. And even on top of that, not only is that guy now the VP of football ops talking about sportsmanship and respect for the game and others who play it, the broadcast, it must have been a Monday night game, I'm not sure, but John Madden's on the broadcast, and essentially John Madden's laughing about it. Is like, yeah, shouldn't have been standing there. Don't stand around the pile. So not only no penalty or fines or suspensions, they're blaming the guy who got hit for standing around the pile, taking a helmet from a Superman dive well after the play. And so just times have changed, and John Runyon, I think, is a perfect example of that.
Makes me think of a scouting term. I assume it's still used: pile inspectors. Usually that's like a corner that gets close to the pile but not going to really get in it. I'm a pile inspector, and those guys used to get picked off left and right by the Runyons of the world. I didn't know you retweeted that or that was going out. It just dawned on me, like, this is not the cleanest player ever. I mean, he had a lot of moments like that. That's pretty funny stuff, though. It's good stuff.
So the values of the NFL have changed, and a lot of people pointing out John Runyon making that statement is pretty funny.
Pretty funny.
Yeah, pretty ironic.
So back to Al-Shaair, I think it's very fitting. You mentioned Jeudy was playing the role of the villain last night in a kind of fun way. The way Al-Shaair handled it after too was kind of, I'm the villain, I'm the bad guy, rubbing it in your face, basically giving the finger to the crowd, more or less, that I'm happy with how I handled it. And I think the way Runyon described it is 100% right. And you have to suspend guys for that. Not to mention the visual was terrible. We talked about it yesterday. We don't have to go much into much more detail about it, but I do think there should be some sort of penalty on a quarterback if he fake slides or like bluff slides. But just to make their life easier, I do feel for these linebackers and safeties, etc. But you can't smack Trevor Lawrence in the head and have him carted off.
While he's sliding, because you can't defend yourself. If Trevor Lawrence was head first running, trying to get a first down, and you lay a big hit on him, and maybe it's helmet to helmet, maybe it's illegal. Yeah, you're playing football. Maybe it was, maybe you get penalized, but you can't defend yourself if you're just sliding and you're really
giving yourself up.
Right. And so that's the big aspect of this one. And and he deserves to be suspended.
Maybe they bump it down to 2, but I mean, he's going to miss time.
I'm trying to think of any other cases of this, and that's probably going to be the argument from Al-Shaair, is like, when has a guy ever been suspended 3 games for a hit before? And so that might be his only really way out of that. But Yeah,
I mean,
I agree with it. It's got
he's gonna miss time no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely, and he should.
And he should. I have no problem with it at all.
I've got one more quick stat before we move on to the next subject here, because and I want to talk about the Bears and their head coach job and Ryan Poles, the GM, who's going to lead that. But we talked about the Jameis stat, which is fascinating. Here's another really interesting stat that I saw this weekend, and I wanted to bring it up. This from Josh Dubow of the Associated Press. So the most losses for a starting quarterback through their first 4 years in the NFL. David Carr, he lost 43 games in 4 years. That's the most ever losses for us as a starting quarterback through 4 years in the NFL.
Didn't even play 17 games. So there was 4 games there he could have lost even more,
Right. And then through 5 years, he was still the starter, 53 games. So lost 10 more. So through 5 years, the most losses by a starting quarterback, still David Carr, 53 losses, excuse me. Through 6 years. Well, he only got to lose 3 the next year because I think it was pretty much done there in Houston for David Carr. 56 losses, still the most through 6 years as a starting quarterback in the NFL. So David Carr, through 4 years, through 5 years, through 6 years, David Carr, the most losses by a starting quarterback. Who do you think has the most losses through 7 years as a starting quarterback in NFL history?
Wow. I was thinking this could be like a Daniel Jones stat, or, you have to be good enough to keep your job. Carr makes all the sense in the world because you have the built-in excuse of you're the first overall pick on an expansion team. You're not expected to win. We're going to have to be, take your time with you. Is it some old school dude like Bradshaw? Like
it's not old school. Did you guess Carr? Was that
his
one?
brother?
It's Derek Carr.
I did not. I said the word Carr, but I was not talking about there.
You're right. If you said Carr, but it's not David, it's Derek. So through 7 years, the most losses by a starting quarterback is now Derek Carr, 63. Most losses through 8 years, Derek Carr, 70. Most losses through 9 years as a starting quarterback, Derek Carr, 79. Most losses through 10 years, Derek Carr, 87. Most losses through 11 years now, Derek Carr, 92. So the most losses as a starting quarterback through 4 years of a career, all the way through 11 years of career, belong to the Carr family.
There's definitely some like the Carrs or lemons. There's jokes galore here, Carr jokes here. Some Carr smart guy could come up with some funny stuff here. That's pretty crazy. But it adds up too, because he's not bad, but he's good at losing games.
Being the starter, but on bad, and like obviously David Carr was on one of the expansion Texans were the worst team that's ever been assembled.
That adds up, yeah.
Right. And then Derek Carr has been on some bad Raiders teams and is now not on the greatest Saints team, but he's good enough to be a starter in the NFL, and he'll be a starter again after this if he's no longer on the Saints after this year. But it's pretty insane that the Carr family has that on lock.
Wow. We might not want to hang a billboard in front of the Carr parents' house on that one. Yeah.
They'll focus more on the wins.
There are some good stuff, yeah.
This as well. All right. Next, let's talk Bears and the latest from Chicago. Who's in charge? How that head coach search is going to work? And to me, a fascinating quote from the Bears president, Kevin Warren. Next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you in part by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And you can get ready to tackle the NFL action right now with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Live in-game betting on the NFL, on the NBA, NHL, tons of other sports. Anything you can imagine, you can get in on, and tons of props as well, not just all the weekly lines for those sports at FanDuel. And, when you get a hunch in the middle of a game and you want to see the latest stats, you want to see live play-by-play and so much more, you can find all that as well on the same place you're placing your bets at FanDuel.com. And you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So download the app or go to FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So the latest from Chicago, and they've made it clear now that Bears GM Ryan Poles will stay, and he is running the search for the next head coach of the Chicago Bears, along with team president Kevin Warren. And Kevin Warren isn't a figure that I really knew much about here, but he's clearly the spokesperson for the ownership there, and said that Ryan Poles, along with himself, Kevin Warren, will lead the head coach search. And I think that's what we figured. And we even talked about that, Matt, that Ryan Poles is he's done a good job of building that thing up. And he should probably get a shot to hire another GM or another head coach. But he better get this right, because this is his last chance probably to hire a head coach, and hopefully someone that can develop a quarterback is going to be pretty important here. I'd be shocked if they don't go to the offensive side of the ball. And that's usually what happens. The defensive coordinator gets fired, you hire an offensive coach. But the thing that stood out to me is Warren said this about the Bears job and the next head coach. He said, quote, "This will be the most coveted job in the National Football League this year." Is the Bears the most coveted job in the NFL right now, Matt, with young quarterback Caleb Williams in tow?
Let's unpeel this. I know nothing about Kevin Warren either, but just to educate our listeners, my hunch is, you said he's team president. He doesn't necessarily have to be a football guy. Like the ticket sales people probably report to him. Bears.com people report to him. The facility managers, the stadium people, everybody probably reports to him. Business side, payroll, accountants, everybody. So one of the branches is the football people. That it doesn't mean that he is a football mind. Maybe he is, I don't know, but most teams have somebody like that run the show. Like any job, you inherit some good things, you inherit some bad things if you take the job. Is inheriting Poles a good thing or a bad thing? I'd love to be able to take a job and me pick my GM. That makes it more attractive than, I don't know if I know this guy. Maybe I have an existing relationship. Who knows if they keep him or who they hire. But I don't love not picking my GM. So that goes in the negative column. But it's something I can work with if Ryan Poles and I spend a weekend together and we get along great and see the game the same way. Okay, I'll take that risk. Now, I think Thomas Brown is interesting in this equation because clearly it's super small sample size. The offense took a bump when he became the offensive coordinator. And I mentioned yesterday, I hope he's still able to focus on Williams and things now that he's the head coach. I wish he could just do audition for offensive coordinator. Might Warren and Poles want to keep Brown around in some capacity? Like, you're going to inherit him as your offensive coordinator too. Like, oh, well, I can't pick my offensive coordinator. I can't pick my GM. Like, that's not a great start, but maybe they're good people. You also inherit a lot of cap space. I just looked. The Pats, Cardinals, Raiders, and Commanders are the only ones that have more. So you have $82 million in cap space. Great. As it stands now, you have the 11th pick in the draft. You'll probably end up somewhere in there, 10 to 15, something like that, win another game or two. Great. I think inheriting Caleb Williams is definitely a great thing. But if I get that job, in terms of roster building, this goes back to the relationship with Poles. Hey, we got to spend that cap space and draft picks on linemen, both sides of the ball. I want big, rugged, city of Chicago people. I want guys that can play in the mud, that can play in the AFC North. I want Al Capone. I want badasses. I'm done spending money on DJ Moore and Odunze and Allen. I mean, nothing against those guys. Some of those are nice inheritance too, Odunze in particular. But if you're going to provide me with the best center I can get and a 320-pound defensive tackle that's nasty, we can talk. Then maybe it is the best job.
Well, good news and bad news. Al Capone not available in this draft, but there is a 320-pound defensive tackle prospect.
I know where you're going.
By the name of Dante Corleone. So
the Godfather, they call him. Yep.
Yeah, the Godfather. So you might be in luck there if you're the Chicago Bears. You're looking for that next nose tackle. So that's phenomenal. I'm with you. I think you nailed it. And when the GM hires the coach, the GM's in charge. GM's shopping for the groceries, and so the coach is going to have to be okay with that. So Bill Belichick's not getting that job, right? Right. And so I do think it's a better job than it was.
Sure.
When they hired Eberflus, and maybe there were candidates they liked more than Eberflus that they couldn't get. Could they get that level of candidate now? Could they steal Ben Johnson from the Detroit Lions, for example? And
either of their coordinators, maybe.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I do think it's a better job. Is it the best job in the NFL this year? I don't know, but it's not a bad job at all, especially if you get along with Poles and you guys, you think you can have a good working relationship there. But if you start to try to push other coaches on them, even if, they're well-liked coaches, that's going to be difficult. And I think some powerhouse coaches are going to want to be in charge, and they hire their GM. So it does take some candidates out of it, but I think you still can get some really good candidates there. And I think it's a huge draw to have a number 1 overall pick and a young quarterback with young talent at receiver and a clear path with some cap space going forward. It is a really good job, I think, in Chicago.
Yeah, it's a pretty good defense intact. They do have Wright, the first round pick at right tackle. That's, at least a lineman that fits the bill. But I would absolutely have to be in sync with the GM that our goal here is to dominate the trenches. I mean, if you can help me dominate the trenches this offseason, then yes, this is the best job I could ask for.
I'm trying to think of any free agent, because stud defensive linemen, stud offensive linemen, especially tackles, don't hit free agency very often.
I mean, it would have to be a draft priority first and foremost.
Yeah, I think you have to go to the draft first at those positions and maybe overpay for like a guard in free.
Mm-hmm.
That type of a move is probably the direction you have to go if you're the Bears as far as building the trenches.
How the Panthers signed 2 guards, you probably overpaid, but I understand why,
And one of the things I love that Brian Gutekunst has done in Green Bay is draft multiple players from the same position group to try to fix the group, because your hit rate's going to be 50%. So draft 2 of them. We saw that at tight end, and the second tight end, Kraft, is looking like the dude for them. If they would have said, well, we already drafted a tight end in Musgrave, we're going to go to a different position, they wouldn't have Kraft right now on the roster. They've done it at wide receiver. They've done it a number of times. They've done it on the offensive line. And then Zach Tom, the 4th rounder, ends up being a starting player for them at multiple positions, so I love that. And so any team that's trying to, it's really nice for a team to be able to go to an offseason like, look, we know exactly how to attack this thing. So let's put all the resources there at these spots, multiple offensive linemen, defensive linemen, all the shapes, whoever's the best guys we can get free agency, and then we'll draft the rest of them as well.
Yeah. And I do like Sweat, and I do like Dexter, on that. They have some young pieces there too. It's not totally barren on both lines, but you play in Chicago, you're going to play in weather. You're going to help your skill guys out. We're not spending money on DeAndre Swift the first hour of free agency. We're going to get the best center out there,
Interesting. Fascinating team, Chicago Bears, in the 2025 offseason. Their plan is now set in motion. And we're set in motion to come back with a little mailbag this week. We're going to have our 6-pack of picks and start looking at week 14 on the NFL schedule. Phenomenal Thursday night game to start it off with the Packers and the Lions in the NFC North. All that to come. Make sure you stay right here and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Matt and I back tomorrow right here. Peacock and Williamson.